Good evening and welcome to our COVID-19 update at this hour. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. Here are the highlights. Federal government extends yet again phase 2 of the eased lockdown for 4 weeks as aviation minister says international flights will resume in weeks, not months. Aziz Adesina Fashola, also known as Naira Marley, arraigned in court in Lagos over violation of COVID-19 lockdown rules. A number of COVID cases in India exceeds 2 million. We start off in Abuja, where the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 has announced an extension of the second phase of the eased lockdown for another 4 weeks, with some modifications to the COVID-19 safety protocols. The chairman of the task force, Mr. Boss Mustafa, notes that the modifications to the protocols are to address the country's economic, socio-political, and health concerns. Mr. Mustafa, who announced the extension during the task force briefing, also notes that the extension and modifications to the protocols will help the government achieve its plans to gradually reopen international flight operations.
After due consideration of the recommendations, Mr. President has approved the following: maintaining the current phase of the national response to COVID-19 for another 4 weeks in line with the modifications reflected in the report, the 6th interim report we submitted, which the national coordinator will give you further details on. B, partnering with states and local governments to improve community sensitization and engagement to the COVID-19 response. And C, mandating state authorities and the Federal Capital Territory to enforce non-pharmaceutical guidelines, primarily the use of face masks in public appearances and places. D, encouraging state governments to collaborate with the local government authorities to intensify necessary measures such as contact tracing, grassroots mobilization, and risk communication.
Meanwhile, the national coordinator of the task force, Dr. Sani Aliu, says the federal government is working closely with the states and local governments, major sectors of the economy, as well as security agencies to enforce safety measures within Nigerian communities. Dr. Aliu says this has become necessary in order to achieve behavioral changes needed to curb the spread of the virus, as many Nigerians continue to shun the non-pharmaceutical guidelines put in place.
It's all about behavioral change, and behavioral change is all about modifying our risk perception and making sure that people understand what it means to catch COVID and how to protect themselves. Repeatedly, the NOI polls that we have done week to week have shown that the issue is not about knowledge. Nigerians know, virtually all Nigerians know about COVID or have heard of it. 90 to 95% of our polls show that Nigerians know how to protect themselves. But the issue is moving from knowledge to action. Behavioral change doesn't necessarily equate to enforcement, because the best way to get persons to change their behavior is to convince them that it's in their best interest to do so, or it's in the interest of their families and loved ones. The police cannot be everywhere at the same time. Having said this, we will continue to work more closely at the state level and at the community level to enforce some of these face masks, some of these measures, particularly the issue of wearing face masks, which is a simple intervention that we know can go a long way towards cutting transmission. We would also work more closely with other parts of the security services and enforcement agencies, such as road safety from the transport side and from the aviation side, and also working with other sectors of the economy. If you're not wearing a face mask, you should not be allowed access into a public building. If you're not wearing a face mask, you should not be provided with services.
Blame no one for the closure of international airports across the country, and that's the plea from the Minister of Aviation, Hadi Sirika, today in Abuja, while answering questions from journalists on the continued delay in the resumption of international flights. Mr. Sirika says the government is aware of the adverse effects of the closure and is doing everything possible to ensure the airports are opened in weeks and not months. It would be recalled that restriction on international flights into Nigeria due to COVID-19 started in late March 2020.
But we can't open alone. Within the space where we operate, within our area of operations, we've got all kinds of people in there in the airports. You've got immigration, you've got police, you've got customs, you've got civil defense, you've got everybody in there, port health, etc., etc. So the PTF Task Force COVID-19 had set up that technical committee to come up with this date where everybody is happy to start. If it is our own, we wouldn't want to have even closed the airports anyway. We are forced by this monster to close. So we will open as soon as one of us are happy to open, and I want to adopt what the national coordinator has said. It will be in weeks rather than in months. So please do not put any blame on anybody, not on our chairman, please kindly. He's been spending all of these hours, all of his man hours on this COVID-19 task force. And you remember he's the anchor of this government and the secretary to the government of the Federation. Also, please do not put it on the Ministers of Health. Please don't. And also don't put it on me. Put it on COVID-19.
And the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 has also assured Nigerians that while restrictions are being eased, public health response is actually being strengthened. The Director General of the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, the NCDC, Dr. Chikwe Ihekwazu, said this is the decision of the National Council of Health during its meeting, which was also held today in Abuja. Dr. Ihekwazu says although it is very difficult to trace contacts when there are many cases within a community, it is not impossible to achieve, and the Council has resolved to ensure that communities across the country get the necessary assistance needed during this COVID era.
Today we came out of a National Council of Health meeting led by the Honorable Minister of Health with all the commissioners of health from across the country. And what we collectively agreed was in order for our economy to open, in order for our country to restart slowly, in order for the full benefits of the ease of the restrictions that were being implemented, we on the public health side had a responsibility to strengthen our response. And so that's what we're going to do collectively. Across the country, the public health response is actually being strengthened. And we will know we have to continue. Until we have a vaccine, there won't be a point where we say, okay, let's relax. That's completely out of the question. So the meeting we had today with the Honorable Commissioners was to really encourage ourselves, to give ourselves, the motivation to keep going, despite 6 months of really tough work. And so we will continue doing that across the public health infrastructure so that the rest of the country can at least look forward to living with COVID, so until we have a vaccine further down the line.
Popular Nigerian singer and songwriter Aziz Adesina Fashola, also known as Naira Marley, has been arraigned by operatives of the State Criminal Investigation Department, Yaba in Lagos, for alleged violation of the Cessation of Movement and Interstate Travel Order. Naira Marley was arraigned this afternoon alongside his manager, Sheyi Awonuga, at the Lagos State Special Offences Mobile Courts in Oshodi, on a one-count charge of breach of Cessation of Movement and Interstate Travel Order. The two accused persons pleaded guilty to the charge and were fined 100,000 naira each by the presiding magistrate. It would be recalled that on the 13th of June 2020, around 2 o'clock, the suspects, in total violation of the then lockdown order, embarked on a non-essential travel from Lagos to Abuja and back to Lagos on the same day through the Murtala Mohammed International Airport in Ikeja for a musical concert in the Federal Capital Territory at that time.
You could recall on 13th of June, Aziz Fashola, popularly known as Niramali, violated that order by traveling from the Murtala Mohammed International Airport to Abuja. And he returned that same day with his manager to perform a concert in Abuja. That is in total violation of the order in place in Lagos here. And we decided to get him to answer for that offense. And today we arraigned him in the mobile court here. They pleaded guilty, and the presiding magistrate awarded a punishment of 100,000 naira fine to each of them. Once you are convicted, even if it is a fine of 1 million, a fine of 10 naira, the name remains, he is an ex-convict. And that is a big thing on its own.
No tertiary institution in Nigeria will survive by the end of this year if the federal government does not open the universities. And that's according to the Vice Chancellor of the Kwara State University, Professor Mohammed Akombi, who is advocating an immediate reopening of all such schools. Professor Akombi, while speaking with journalists in Ilorin, the Kwara State capital, says what is most important is for the students to strictly adhere to COVID-19 safety protocols instead of staying perpetually at home.
Government has said in secondary school, the exit classes should go back. I believe that that's an experiment, and we should all pray that we won't have a spike. I believe if we don't have a spike, then we'll start to, government may come and say, okay, let's start experimenting with the final year students and things like that. The good thing is that, as I speak with you, NUC has sent a template to all the universities in Nigeria, asking that we give a brief on our state of preparedness if students are to be called back. I believe after the next stage will be maybe a phased resumption. I agree that COVID-19 is ravaging. I agree that one way to stop it is by ensuring physical or social distancing. But again, I believe that if a cure or a vaccination is not found for the virus, then the government would have no choice but to send us back to school, to open the schools, put in certain protocols.
The announcement today of an extension of the second phase of the eased lockdown for another 4 weeks by the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 is the third for the second phase currently being observed across the country. As part of the revised guidelines released today, the ban on entertainment centers remains in place, while the restrictions on recreational parks have been lifted for non-contact physical activities. But what has been the impact of this eased lockdown on the fight against COVID-19 in Nigeria? And what is the situation with enforcement and compliance? I'm being joined from our Abuja studios by a virologist and public health epidemiologist who is also a member of the West Africa Network for TB, AIDS and Malaria, Dr. Ekela Ishaku. Dr. Ishaku, thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ladi, for having me. Thank you, viewers.
Let me begin from what the PTF has just received approval from the president to do. That is to continue with the current phase of the eased lockdown, but with some minor changes. One of those, for example, is that recreational parks will open for non-contact activities, but entertainment centers will remain closed. Restaurants will continue with takeaway services, whereas there are other institutions that will continue to remain closed. In some places, religious institutions will open. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, so I want to commend the Presidential Task Force for actually relying on data to actually extend the ease of lockdown by 4 weeks. I think it is commendable. This will enable us to actually strengthen the national response to COVID-19. Ladi, I want to say that this will also enable us to actually move into the phase of enforcement. I quite agree with some of the guidelines that has been laid out, but what is key in these guidelines is that as a nation, we must be able to enforce these guidelines. We must be able to also enforce non-pharmaceutical
I'm sorry to
measures
interrupt you, Dr. Ishaku.
with it.
And I'm happy you mentioned the issue of enforcement, because that has been a recurring decimal ever since COVID-19 arrived on Nigeria's shores. It's almost 6 months now since that happened. And people continue to flout, people continue to ignore, people continue to dismiss all these guidelines that are put in place. So many, I mean, take just one. Let's take the issue of face masks. It's now almost 6 months, and you still find that there are people who continue to shun the use of face masks, which is why there are those who talk about enforcement. What do you make of it?
I think, Ladi, is because as a nation, you know, Nigeria as a nation is not a disciplined nation. And for us to forge ahead from a public health dimension is that it is very key for us to go into enforcement. And I am of the school of thought that we need to enforce most of these non-pharmaceutical measures. Wearing face masks should be key. And that brings to bear that because a lot of states do not take responsibility of this pandemic, a lot of local governments too did not take responsibility of this pandemic. Ladi, what stops us from having a mobile court that should be able to charge people for not wearing these face masks? What stops states from inaugurating task force, health task force, to make sure that the use of face masks in public places is being enhanced? I think it's only Lagos State and maybe partly Abuja and partly Kaduna states that have a task force. I've seen task force in Lagos sealing premises. I see task force in Kaduna State sealing premises. What happened to other states? So states need to take ownership of this pandemic. States need to take ownership of this fight and begin to come up with task force, health task force, and mobile courts. We need to see, without an enforcement, it is very difficult on Nigerians to have a behavioral change. You can hear from the coordinator of the task force saying that knowledge is different from attitudinal change. So we need a mobile court to be able to fine people for not wearing face masks. Ladi, I was in a meeting today. I was the only person wearing face masks. I look odd. They were even laughing at me. They said I look old school because I was wearing a face mask. And then they laugh about it. You know, they make joke out of it. And I felt like as a country, we have not taken responsibility. So in the 4 weeks to come, I expect state government to begin to come up with task force. Even my state government, I have not seen any task force going to seal places to enforce the wearing of face masks in public places. So we actually need enactment of this. So I go with the presidential task force, and then I buy into the idea of enforcing this.
We'll take a break, Dr. Ishaku, at this point. When we come back, the big issue now, as revealed from the presidential task force briefing, is this possibility of the reopening of international flights and all that portends in weeks, not months. I'm quoting the aviation minister now, so please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to our COVID-19 update. Before the break, we were talking to Dr. Kiala Ishaku. Dr. Ishaku, thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. There are major changes being proposed at this point within this next 4 weeks. Of course, some of them we have discussed already: the opening of schools for exit classes, the opening of rail lines, domestic rail transportation. But then now there is also, going by what the aviation minister talked about this evening, international flights, international air operations in weeks, not months, if we are to quote him exactly what he said. Are we pushing the envelope a bit too far, or do you think we've gotten a handle of what's going on and that is logically the next step?
I think we have gotten the handle of what is going on, and it is also in a logical step. But we have missed something. And I felt like, let me proffer a prescription to the Presidential Task Force on these premises. If you look at Lome, which is a very small country within the sub-Saharan Africa, before you bought a flight to travel to any country, you have a test, a COVID test, and then you will be issued with a result or a clearance certificate. And then this is about $50 to $60. And you get the result within 2 to 4 to 5 hours at their airport. So Lome now is becoming a transiting point for sub-Saharan Africa. And I think Nigeria is a major point that should be reckoned with. What I've seen the Presidential Task Force have not come up with is what happened to our testing points at the airports. We have resumed local flights, but I've not seen anything like a modular testing lab. So I want to, call on the NCDC and the Presidential Task Force to see how we can be able to set up modular testing labs in our key international airports, like the one in Lagos and in Abuja. Before you board, even if it is a local flight, you should be able to present, beyond your boarding pass, be able to present a COVID-19 certificate or clearance or result, as the case may be. One, this will also help us to protect the well-being of Nigerians and also protect the well-being of people that are going to travel by air. So I think we have gotten grasp of it, but we have not yet discussed more about what happened to passengers that will be traveling on board via the flights. So I want to see how the Presidential Task Force will begin to see how NCDC and other private partners can be able to set up modular molecular diagnostic lab that will have a very short turnaround time in our airports. For people that could not be able to present certificate of COVID-19, should be able to produce, be able to carry out the test at a spot, and then be able to get the result, and then before boarding. So I think we got it right by thinking of how to open our airports, but I want us to also add the component of testing, which is quite key.
The other thing, of course, is this current nationwide curfew. When it started, it was 8 to 6, then it subsequently became 10 to 6, and then as it stands now, it is 10 to 4. That's been extended for another 4 weeks, and I guess the question is that still necessary since we are opening up all these other institutions, and from the viewpoint of those who are in key states in the country, all that this has done is to create significant logistic challenges for them, particularly with transport.
Yeah, I think it's quite key that we maintain the coffee. This is because, Ladi, I was part of a response team for the states within the Middle Belt. And actually, when you go at night, you see a lot of beer parlors, you see a lot of hotels, you see a lot of clubs opening up at night. You know, this can begin to create an ecosystem for the transmission of these viruses. This is because there are no enforcement to that. So I think from a public health dimension, it is quite good that we maintain the coffee, regardless of the ease of transportation. This is because a lot of activities, goes on at night. Clubs are being opened, bars and restaurants, breach even the guidelines and protocols, and then they open up. So I think it is good for us to maintain the coffee for the next 4 weeks. If we ease the coffee, Ladi, I'm sure that there will be exponential increase in the number of cases. This is because the clubs will become an ecosystem where there will be personal contacts, and then the transmission will be higher. And I hope Ladi, people will not be able to adhere to non-pharmaceutical rules when it comes to club. And then, but I think by and large, that is okay for now in the next 4 weeks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akiala Ishaku, for your perspectives tonight. It's been a pleasure having you with us on the program. Dr. Ishaku joined us from Abuja. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ladi.
The COVID-19 death toll in Nigeria has risen to 927 after the country's daily fatality toll increased to its highest in close to 2 weeks. 17 deaths were recorded in 6 states. Anambra had 6 of them, Cross River 4, Edo 3, Oyo 2. The FCT and Kebbi had 1 each. Within the last 24 hours, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, the NCDC, announced 457 new confirmed cases in 20 states and the Federal Capital Territory. Lagos had 137 of those new cases. The FCT 76, Plateau 40, Rivers 35, Enugu 34, Oyo 25, Abia 23, Delta 12, Ebonyi 11, and Edo also recorded 11 confirmed cases. Others are Cross River with 10, the same with Kwara. Kaduna had 9, Anambra 7, Ogun 5, Bauchi 3, Imo 3, Nasarawa and Osun had 2, and Ekiti and Kano had 1 new confirmed case. The total active cases in the country stands at 11,798. Top 5 states with cases on admission are the FCT with the highest number at 2,908, followed by Lagos with 2,253. Oyo State is next with 1,375 on admission. Plateau has 665 cases on admission, and Ondo has 565 COVID-19 patients on admission. Till date, 44,890 cases have been confirmed, 32,165 have been discharged, and as we said at the beginning, 927 deaths have been recorded in 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory. The Taraba State government has allocated over 22 billion naira as response fund for COVID-19 in its reviewed 2020 budget of 215 billion naira due to the economic effects of the virus in the state. The new budget, which as it stands, is earmarked to cushion the effect of the pandemic in the provision of PPEs, treatment of patients, as well as the establishment of additional isolation centers if need be. But in spite of trimming the budget, residents are still in some sort of panic over recording COVID-19 fatalities in the state for the first time. All right, let's talk to Dr. Pauline Ipa, who is a molecular laboratory scientist. She joins us from Rotterdam in the Netherlands via Skype. She is also on the staff of the Erasmus Medical Center. Good evening, Dr. Ipa. Thank you for your time on the program this evening.
Good evening, Ladi. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we've just had our eased lockdown extended for 4 weeks. Coming from where you are in the Netherlands, do you think that is a cautious but necessary move?
Well, yeah, I think it's a necessary move because COVID-19 is more or less here to stay. So at some point, the economy must open. So if you look at the curve, if the Nigerian curve is actually showing that there's decreased infection rate, then of course that it's a good idea as well. But what is most important is how prepared is Nigeria to follow the surveillance of the movement of the people. Because if people are going to be going through interstate travel and there's going to be contact, it's very difficult to follow the social distancing. Of course, we're going to profess it, but how much follow-up would be done? In the Netherlands, for instance, when our lockdown was reduced, we had problems with new infection, which is what we are seeing now. So at some point, yeah, it's gonna affect the infection rate, and the surveillance system must be put in place so that contact tracing would be improved, treatment would be improved, isolation would be improved, because COVID wouldn't go away. So it's a welcome development, but how prepared is Nigeria?
Very good question, and I guess the next couple of days and weeks will answer that question. Let me take you to the Netherlands itself, which you alluded to in your answer to the previous question. The Netherlands, of course, is one of the countries that is making a significant contribution towards the COVID-19 vaccine. What's the update on that? Can you tell us?
Yes, so the Dutch pharma company, Janssen, which is a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson America, have a vaccine candidate. And this candidate is presently having its human trials in the US and in Belgium. And so far, everything looks promising. And in September, they hope to come to the Netherlands as well as Spain and Germany. And the hope is if everything goes well in the next couple of months when they come to the Netherlands, they're coming in September, that would, if it goes well then, it will push them into the phase 3 clinical trials. And that's the big deal because that's where you get the go or no go. So we are keeping our fingers crossed that it would all go well. And the good thing about the company right now is that they have 2 vaccines 8 weeks apart, and they're trying to see if within the next 2 months they can reduce the dose so that when they produce more, they could be able to give it to a larger number of people in the society.
The Netherlands generally is known as a more liberal society there. And so when I ask you this question, I ask it against the background of that. The issue of compliance and enforcement is one that Nigeria has had to deal with, Nigeria continues to deal with, but other countries are also having it as a challenge. What was the situation like, or what is the situation like in the Netherlands with regards to complying with the regulations and then enforcement of such regulations?
Yeah, in the beginning, it was a bit difficult because when you have summer, then it's very difficult to keep people indoors. But I would say that for now, it's a challenge. But a couple of months back, we just had to stay at home because nothing was happening. The society was on lockdown. And one thing you should understand is that here in the Netherlands, the system is well structured. Before COVID, we could work from home already. So when you have burnout at work, you stay at home and you can work. We already have online marketing going on. So it wasn't such a big deal to stay at home. What people were missing more was the relationships with family and friends. But now that the holiday season is out, of course, we've eased our lockdown, but they still try to tell us if you have no reason to go out, stay at home, don't use the public transport unless it is important. And it's a struggle, but we could see people comply.
Given that situation, and I know you did say earlier on that we're going to have to live with COVID-19 for some time, so we have to work things around the fact that it's going to be with us for some time. And knowing the kind of experience that you have and you've described of the Netherlands, what kind of measures would you say Nigeria could take to improve on the compliance levels, which there is a consensus in Nigeria that the compliance levels are quite low. Is there anything you can tell us that could improve that?
Yeah. I always like to look at the fundamental problems first when it comes to my country, Nigeria, because, of course, people might want to stay at home and maybe wear face masks, not be around people. But when we look at the financial constraints of such people, it's easy for, I would say, maybe the wealthy to stay at home, but the less privileged needs to go out to look for food, clean water. What kind of accommodation do you want them to isolate themselves in? So it's a kind of slippery slope. Nigeria has to help in these fundamental problems. And then you have to enlighten people, the fear of COVID, the disbelief that it is, it's maybe for the rich and not for the poor, or for the enlightened mind and not for the, so Nigeria has to look at its fundamental problems, see how they can help people, and this would help them also obey the rules for social distancing, isolation, stay at home and stuff like that.
Before I let you go, I must ask you this, though. About 57,000, that's what we have as the figure for the Netherlands, 57,357 cases. That's what the Netherlands has now. But it's had 6,000 plus deaths, 6,173. Yeah. Can you tell us what's responsible for that?
Well, yes. In the beginning, this happened at the very beginning of the pandemic, and what really happened is that we lost a lot of people in the elderly range. Nursing homes were really affected, and because people, unlike Nigeria, where you keep your elderly at home, nursing homes is like a hostel where they keep elderly people, and family go to visit, and we know that for the elderly, COVID-19 was not good for them. They actually died. So we had a lot of people within the age range of 65 and above really died. And at that point, it was also difficult to understand, COVID-19. It's novel, it's new. People didn't understand how to treat it, and yeah, so that was the basic reason why we had a lot of deaths.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Pauline Ipwa. Thank you so much for your time and for the information you've provided. Dr. Ipwa joined us via Skype from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Larry. Bye.
Scores of Nigerian youth in the United Arab Emirates, jobless and homeless, are calling on the Nigerian government to help them return home before the United Arab Emirates' August the 17th deadline, by which all holders of expired visas must vacate the country or face the wrath of the law. Some say they have return tickets that cannot be used unless Nigeria opens its airspace to commercial flights. Others who claim to be victims of fake employment agencies have no funds to purchase a flight home. Our correspondent, Mayowa Adegoke, has more on this story.
This is where these young Nigerians stranded in the United Arab Emirates will spend the night. They are part of a group of over 200 with expired visas willing to return home, but cannot afford the one-way ticket, which costs 2,500 dirhams for an economy class seat.
Yes, I have a returning ticket, which I can use because the international airport has not opened. And the repatriation flight I cannot afford because I have no job.
Many lost their jobs during the COVID-19 lockdown, while others are victims of fake employment agencies run by Nigerians.
So immediately I came, within 1 week, I've already noticed that all of them are fake. They can tell you, promise you heaven and earth. So after certain done, you not get work.
They say they have written severally to the consulate and the embassy for help with repatriation before the 17th of August, UAE government's deadline for all residents with expired visas to vacate the country.
We've sent a lot of mails to both the consulate and the embassy. I even copied some of the officials at the embassy. No response. We sent reminders many times, no response. The mails were not acknowledged, not to talk of responding to the mails.
The embassy and consulate are yet to respond to our inquiries, but the chairman of the Diaspora Commission says there are plans for Nigerians who want to come home, but they will have to be documented regardless of their situation.
Now, if you actually go to the mission and write their name, the mission can look at this number of people cannot afford to pay. So how can we, work out something like that? And this is what they are not going to the mission to register the person. So if without that, you cannot track the numbers. There are those who will take advantage and tell lies. So you need to actually verify. Okay, look at what we're doing with Lebanon and all that. Because by them working with the mission, mission is documented and the state of origin. So we can say, okay, there are these people, let's appeal for support to get them back.
With no income to renew their papers and no money to pay for repatriation flights, these young ones stand the risk of being imprisoned by the August 17 deadline. From Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Mayowa Adegoke for Channels Television News.
Let's talk now to Mayowa Adegoke, who joins us from Dubai. Good evening, Mayowa. Thank you for your reporting and welcome to the program. It's like a catch-22 situation here. They can't pay to come home, and they don't have any other. They don't have jobs to earn the pay to come home through another method. So what's their situation right now?
The situation right now, I think critical is the only word that can describe it, and a lot of them are actually getting desperate. Today, I must tell you that at least about 50 or more of young Nigerian youth who are stranded here were actually sort of camped outside the consulate in Dubai. And this is to show just how desperate these guys are getting, because they do realize that if they do not take advantage of this sort of grace that the UAE government has given, they just might get in serious trouble after the 17th of August. And each day is beginning to really count. So it's between the rock and a very hard place. Honestly, I'm not sure what will happen to these guys if help doesn't come for them soon.
Are you hearing anything? I mean, I know from your reporting you did indicate there that the Nigerian High Commission in Dubai is not really has not responded to inquiries for what exactly they plan on doing, or if they have any such plans. But with these people camped right outside the premises of the embassy, surely they must be aware of what's going on.
Well, I mean, all I can say is that from conversations I've had with officials at the consulate especially, they say they have written to the government, and pretty much from the look of things, it's out of their hands. They're also trying to say that let well-meaning Nigerians also come in and help in this situation. It's quite dicey. From the conversation you heard with Honorable Abike Dabiri-Erewa, she also raised concerns that they're also concerned about people just trying to leave the country. Perhaps some of them have some records, perhaps some of them have issues with the law, and they just want to sort of sneak out of the country. So they are concerned about getting documentation, knowing who you are, knowing what your situation is, and then knowing where you are from. She did emphasize that part, like, let's know where you're from and let's see how we can get help for you. But it's important that whatever help the government is going to do for these guys, days are counting. So it has to be done like ASAP. And of course, when help does come, they will still need flights that would ferry these guys to safety, quote and unquote. It's really a dicey situation, I must say.
On a more general level, I mean, beyond the Nigerians, in the UAE itself, what's the situation there now? Are the eased restrictions being eased even further?
Honestly, it's quite normal here. I think the only thing that lets us know that there's still a pandemic going on in the world is people still have to wear the masks and follow social distancing rules. But other than that, it's pretty much back to normal. Of course, it's been announced that schools can resume come September for the next academic school year. Plus, they've also given the option that distance learning can continue. So if parents are concerned about their kids going to school, schools have been given that go ahead to give the option of sort of online learning. So that is definitely a good step forward. So they're looking for solutions that accommodate the present reality. So they'll probably have some days in school, some days out school. But if you're concerned, there is the option of distance learning for your child or ward. So that's definitely something that's quite impressive that they've announced. Come September, we'll see how this all works out.
Indeed, tourism, of course, is one of Dubai's mainstays. So the question of people being able to get in and people being able to get out of Dubai, what's the update of that? Of course, here we talk still about reopening to international flights. In Dubai, the situation is not quite the same.
So last week, it was announced that all restrictions had been taken off countries. So pretty much Dubai is open to tourists. However, your country, that's wherever country you're coming from, has to be open as well. So for instance, in the case of Nigeria, Nigeria's airports are not open just yet. So that transaction cannot take place just yet. There's been a lot of talk about Nigerians being banned, and it's quite another dicey situation. So, for instance, when it comes to tourist visas, people coming from Nigeria, Nigeria's airspace is not open. The UAE embassy in Abuja did put out a statement a couple of hours ago about this. So a lot is still hanging on Nigeria opening up its own airspace. But there are concerns about people on the ground here. And from many conversations I've had, a lot of people allude to the fact that there's some level of restriction. However, talking to officials of Dubai Tourism, they have said that for other categories of visas, it's on a case-by-case basis. So there's a lot involved. So perhaps this is where the confusion and miscommunication is coming from. But of course, we'll keep our eye out and keep tabs on this situation just to see what goes ahead.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Maiwa, for your reporting, and please do continue to stay safe out there, even though you do look a lot more relaxed than many of us who are still under quite a great deal of restriction. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
The number of COVID-19 cases in India has now exceeded 2 million. The country reported 58,168 cases in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of confirmed infections to 2,021,407. It still has, or it has had, nearly 40,700 deaths. Infections doubled in just 20 days, faster than either the US or Brazil, the only two countries with a higher number of cases. Meanwhile, the number of cases around the world is gradually approaching 20 million, with more than half that number coming from the US, Brazil, and India.
Cases are still rising in Brazil, and perhaps a shock from the pandemic is one of the country's most influential indigenous leaders, Chief Aritana Yawalapiti, who led the people of Upper Chingu and helped create an indigenous park there, died on Wednesday from COVID-19. His death underscores the threat that Brazil's indigenous people are facing the novel coronavirus pandemic that has spread to their vulnerable communities, infected thousands, and killed hundreds. In Japan, Tokyo's governor Yuriko Koike has called on residents to stay at home as much as possible over an upcoming holiday amid a surge in coronavirus cases. Japan's Obon Festival, a time when spirits of the dead are believed to return from heaven for several days, usually marks an exodus from the capital as people head home to visit graves and spend time with family. This year's celebration comes as COVID-19 cases hit record levels around the country, prompting governors of several prefectures to declare state of emergency. An Israeli research institute that is overseen by the Defense Ministry intends to begin human trials for a potential COVID-19 vaccine as early as October. The Israel Institute of Biological Research would start the trials in conjunction with the Health Ministry after a series of Jewish holidays end in October. The IIBR has been working on a vaccine for 6 months and began animal trials in March.
You can also take a closer look at some of the COVID-19 global numbers in real time by logging on to our website, channelstv.com. You will get more updates and better understanding of all you need to stay safe and alive. I am Ladi Akiri Duluale. Thanks for watching our COVID-19 update tonight. Good night.